Welcome to the 2020 On-Farm Network video results series. I'm Megan Burns, agronomist for the On-Farm Network program. Let's discuss our seeding rate trial results from this growing season. So through the On-Farm Network, we've been conducting seeding rate trials for quite a while now, and we have a total of 86 different seeding rate trials. The main purpose of these trials is obviously to determine the effect of seeding rate on yield. So we've tested a range of seeding rate combinations depending on what each farmer participant is interested in, what makes sense for their farm operation. But the minimum requirement is a difference of at least 30,000 seeds per acre between seeding rate treatments within a trial. So we want to make sure that our treatments are different enough from one another that we believe there's potential for difference in agronomic performance and ultimately yield. So we had a total of 11 seeding rate trials this year, mostly in eastern and central Manitoba, and then we had one up in the Dauphin area and one up in the Swan River area as well. So across all of these trials in total, we were assessing seeding rates ranging between 100,000 seeds an acre and 226,000 seeds an acre. So as we go through the results for each trial, we'll take a look at the combinations that were compared within each trial. So launching right into yield results, we'll move east to west across the province for the trials. So this trial by Lactabani was comparing 130,000, 160,000, and 190,000 seeds per acre. So this is one of our most common seeding rate comparisons that we've had in our on-farm network trials. Here, there was no significant difference in yield between the seeding rates. And as a result, that increased cost of seed per acre in the spring with the higher seeding rates was not offset by an increase in income at harvest time in the fall. Into the Beausejour area, this trial was comparing 120,000, 150,000, and 180,000 seeds an acre. Again, there was no significant yield difference between seeding rates, so that higher cost of seed, again, was not offset by an increase in income at harvest time. Another trial in the Beausejour area compared 130,000, 160,000, and 190,000 seeds an acre again. And again, there was no difference in yield between the treatments. And the last trial in the Beausejour area compared 150,000, 180,000, and 210,000 seeds per acre, again with no significant difference in yield. So moving further west into the Stonewall area, we had another comparison of 130, 160, 190,000 seeds per acre. In this case, the 130,000 seed per acre treatment yielded significantly less than the two higher seeding rates. So the 130 rate yielded less, and then the 160 and 190,000 seeding rates yielded similarly to one another. So when we look at how this plays out in terms of economics, the increase in seeding rate from 130,000 to 160,000 was economic. So you can see that it paid more than paid for itself, obviously depending on soybean price and what the actual cost is to each producer. But generally speaking, it looks like the 130 to 160 increase would pay for itself. However, increasing up to 190,000, the difference in yield was not enough to pay for that increase in seed cost. Into central Manitoba now, near Elm Creek, we had another 130, 160, 190,000 seed per acre comparison with no significant difference between seeding rate treatments in terms of yield. Another Elm Creek area trial compared a really low seeding rate of 100,000 seeds an acre to 130,000 and 160,000. Now, although there was no significant difference in yield between the treatments, we should not assume that this means we can all go out and seed at 100,000 seeds per acre every year without running into a loss of yield potential and a loss of income at some point. So selecting a seeding rate treatment involves considering a number of different factors, which we'll discuss in a couple of minutes after we wrap up with the individual trial results. But interesting that there was no significant difference in yield here. So further south into the Rosemont area, we had another comparison of 130,000, 160,000, and 190,000 seeds an acre, again with no significant difference in yield. So we're not seeing that increase in income to offset the increased seed cost at the higher seeding rates. Moving further south again into the Morris area, this trial compared 120,000, 150,000, and 180,000 seeds an acre, with a significant increase in yield for each increase in seeding rate. So the 150,000 seeds per acre treatment out-yielded the 120,000 seed per acre treatment, And then the 180,000 seed per acre treatment significantly out-yielded both the other ones. So in this case, when we take a look at the economics, there aren't huge increases necessarily in every case, but each increase is economic. So you at least break even, again, depending on what your actual costs are, what your actual price for soybean is that you get at the end of the season or when you sell your grain. But it looks like each increase for this trial was economic. So there was enough of a yield bump to at least cover the cost of that extra seed for the increased seeding rates. So moving northwest now up into the Dauphin area, this trial compared 125,000, 155,000, and 185,000 seeds an acre. So there was no significant yield difference between seeding rates. Therefore, again, we're seeing that increased seed cost be represented as a loss in profit because there was no increased income to offset that cost. And then lastly, we had a trial in the Swan River area that compared 166,000, 196,000, and 226,000 seeds an acre. And there was no significant yield difference for this trial either. Okay, so what's next for seeding rate trials? On the agronomic side of things, I would like to dive deeper into what's driving yield response or lack of yield response that we see in these seeding rate trials. So like I alluded to earlier, there are a number of factors involved in a seeding rate decision and determining the success of that decision. So seed survivability is the main factor, right? This is the big factor determining whether or not you're making a good seeding rate choice and how that's going to play out in terms of yield at the end of the season. But there's so much that goes into determining what seed survivability will be. So it depends on things like your seed lot and seed quality. It could be affected by the equipment that you're using, certainly by seed bed conditions in the spring. What are you seeding into? What are the weather conditions like? What's your insect pressure? What's your disease pressure through that seedling period, etc. So I think the next step for us is to examine as many of these factors as we can to determine why we see an increase in yield with some seeding rates in some places in some years, and then not in other places in other years where we're using the same seeding rate comparisons, right? So diving deeper into the why behind the yield results. So for example, if we take a look at a side-by-side comparison of these two trials, which were from this year, so one from the Beausejour area, the one from the Morris area, they were comparing the same seeding rates, and there was a significant difference in yield between seeding rates for the Morris area trial, but not for the Beausejour area trial. Why would that be? So at first glance, if I go back to our population data that we collect during the season to determine plant stand in all of our seeding rate trials, we'll see that there's a big difference in what the population actually is. So what the plant stand ends up being from the same seeding rates, right? There's a huge difference in plant stand between the two locations. And on top of that, importantly, for yield difference between the seeding rate treatments, there's a really big difference in how different those seeding rates end up being from one another in terms of plant population. So there's a much bigger difference in plant stand per acre with the different seeding rate treatments for the Morris area trial that had the significant difference between yield. So these are the sorts of things that I want to dig into for the trial data that we've already collected over the years, but also going forward as we continue to conduct more seeding rate trials. And then on the economic side of things, so we'll continue evaluating seeding rate comparisons and how they play out in terms of economics for individual trials. But something else I want to look into with our data set that we already have, and then through continuing to build it and conducting more seeding rate trials in the future, is kind of combining the agronomics and the economics to look at that seed survivability and population establishment piece to determine what sort of plant stand equates to what sort of yield potential, and is there merit to, keeping a bit of an increased seeding rate as a just in case sort of insurance in case survivability is poor, in case plant stand establishment is poor. So how much of an insurance factor is there in keeping a bit of a higher than needed seeding rate in terms of yield stability? And how does that play out in terms of economics over time? So these are the sorts of big picture questions that I want to try and answer through our soybean seed treatment trials, which means that we'll definitely be looking to continue these trial types or this trial type in the future. So I want to say a big thank you to all of our on-farm network participants. If you are interested in learning more, getting involved, or if you have a trial idea, please feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you.